Before we begin, I want to acknowledge the purpose of our gathering, to remember the loss of a United States Naval Academy friend and colleague, Lieutenant Kylan Jones Huffman. Lieutenant Huffman died on the 21st of August 2003 in Al-Halal, Iraq, while on voluntary TAD from the U.S. Naval Forces Central Command in Bahrain. He was 31 years old. He was born in April 20th, 1972 in Santa Cruz, California, the son of James and Dagmar Huffman. In 1990, he graduated from the New York School of Monterey, California, and entered the U.S. Naval Academy. He was a member of the Judo Club, the Combat Pistol Team, and the Fencing Squad. He was in the 26th Company and graduated in 1994, having already begun work on his MA in History at the University of Maryland, College Park. He was an honors graduate in the History Department from USNA, winning numerous national competitions for his research. That said, I sort of want to embarrass Midshipman First Class Hamza Lodge tonight. He's a former student of mine that's going to do the introduction for Ambassador Robert Ford. Midshipman Lodge recently completed a critical language scholarship in Arabic, studying in Morocco, studying Arabic. He leads the Muslim ECA at the Academy and plays on the rugby team. Let's take a moment to welcome Midshipman First Class Lodge to the podium.
Good evening, and welcome to the Kylan Jones Huffman Memorial Lecture. It is my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Ambassador Robert Ford. Mr. Ford is a retired American diplomat who served as the United States Ambassador to Algeria from 2006 to 2008, and the United States Ambassador to Syria from 2010 to 2014. A native of Denver, Mr. Ford earned his bachelor's degree in 1980 from Johns Hopkins University and his Master's of Arts from the University's School of Advanced International Studies in 1983. After serving in the Peace Corps in Morocco, he joined the Foreign Service in 1985 as an economics officer. His early postings included Izmir, Turkey, Cairo, Egypt, Algiers, Algeria, and Yaoundé, Cameroon. From 2001 to 2004, he was Deputy Chief of Mission in Bahrain, but he was sent to Iraq after the March 2003 U.S. invasion. He served first as the U.S. representative in the Shiite city of Najaf, and then as political counselor to Ambassador John D. Negroponte in Baghdad. He remained in Iraq until June 2006. President George W. Bush appointed Mr. Ford as ambassador to Algeria in May 2006. President George W. Then it was back to Iraq in 2008, where he served as deputy chief of mission at the U.S. Embassy. Mr. Ford speaks German, Turkish, French, and Arabic. Mr. Ford is a recipient of several Department of State awards, including the 2005 James Clement Dunn Award for Excellence for outstanding work at the mid-level in foreign service, as well as 3 Superior Honor Awards and 2 Meritorious Honor Awards. In 2012, Mr. Ford was awarded the Profile and Courage Award by the John F. Kennedy Library Foundation for his work as the U.S. Ambassador in Syria. Amidst repeated threats to his life, where he was doing what was characterized as traveling around Syria to encourage and support peaceful protesters targeted by Assad's brutal crackdown. Without further delay, give a warm welcome to Ambassador Robert Ford.
Thank you, Hamza. Good evening, everyone. I can't tell you how cool it is for me, a civilian, to come to the Naval Academy. I've never been here before. I've lived in Baltimore off and on for a long time, but I've never actually been to the Academy to speak in Alfred Mann Hall, the guy who wrote about the naval strategy that affected so much of our diplomacy in the early 20th century, and to see flags we captured from the British during the War of 1812. I just was, before I came in, I was looking at the flag from the Guerriere that the Constitution took during the War of 1812. While I was ambassador in Algeria, I read the book Six Frigates. So I'm really thrilled to be here, and I'd like to thank Mark and John for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here. So let me talk about the Middle East and what's going on. And I'm going to talk for about 20 to 25 minutes because I want to make sure we have at least 15 minutes for questions, which I think nobody wants to listen to me for more than about 20 minutes. My students at Hopkins have a real time limit, I think. So what I'm going to do is I want to talk about actually 3 conflicts that are underway right now in the Middle East. And CNN and the New York Times and Fox News, none of them portray these conflicts in a way that I think Middle Easterners understand them. And so what I'm going to try to do tonight is talk about these conflicts in the way people living in the region think about them. And what I hope out of this is that you come away with a sense both of what are the driving dynamics underlying things like the Islamic State or what's happening in Syria and Iraq, but also that you have an understanding of the way people on the ground, Arabs, are looking at these issues. So let me get started. Can I? Great. So the key thing to know is that the biggest issue right now on the ground, from Morocco to Oman, from Algeria to Iraq, is what is the role of religion in society, Arab society, and what is the role of government dealing with religion and dealing with its own citizens. Questions which, in a sense, our culture, our society resolved hundreds of years ago, in some cases even before American independence. But these are issues that are driving events right now. And it doesn't matter if it's the Islamic State, which I've got some pictures of here. They have an image of what role religion should have in society. They're tromping on cigarettes there. That was one of the least offensive pictures I could find. Why do they do that? I mean, smoking, if you go to an Arab country, some of the midshipmen I had dinner with tonight have been to places like Dubai and Oman, and I bet they saw plenty of people smoking. So why are these guys trampling on cigarettes? It's because they think that cigarettes are a vice, and the government's job is to just get rid of vice. That's the government's job. There's another vision, however, of society. There's another vision of how people should live together and what the government should do, and that's what I have here. That's a Lebanese singer. Her name is Nancy Ajram. Nancy Ajram, if you go to the Middle East and you talk to people about your age, and you say, what do you think of Nancy Ajram? I bet you 99% will say, oh, she's wonderful. She does concerts, music concerts, to huge audiences in places like Rabat and Tunisia, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Beirut. But look at her. She doesn't have her hair covered. Her shoulders and her arms are exposed. She is hardly a fundamentalist, an Islamic fundamentalist idea of an ideal woman. So what she represents, and what people who like Nancy Ajram and people who view Nancy Ajram as a symbol, is simply a society that has choices. You have a choice of what to drink. Do you drink alcohol or not? You have choices about what to wear. You have choices about what to say, freedom of speech. You have choices about what you do and what you do every day. These guys here, not to smoke, no vice. I mean, it's outlawed. So this is low choice, this is maximum choice. That's a real issue right now in the Middle East. So I want to go into this in a little detail because the Islamic State is all over the news. So this is the leader of the Islamic State. His name is Abu Bakr Baghdadi. Let me tell you a little about the way where he's coming from. And I actually think he's very sincere about this. He's a smart guy, but I think he's sincere. He believes that in any country and any government, it's not the people who are sovereign. You know, the United States Constitution starts out, "We the people." Abu Bakr Baghdadi would never, ever say that, because he does not believe that the people are ultimately the ones who decide on government. He believes it's God. And so rather than "we the people," he would probably say, "God is greatest." That would be his response, Allahu Akbar. What that means, once you start there, is it means, for example, why would you have elections? Because elections would just elect people who are just people. They're mere mortals. They're not divine. They're not divinely inspired even. And if they're going to legislate laws, they're going to make mistakes. Whereas God has already sent down Islamic law, the Sharia, and therefore the government's job is not to write new laws, it is instead to apply God's law. So you don't need elections and you don't need parliaments. But what would you need if government's job is to interpret and to apply the law? Look at the way he's dressed. He's not dressed like me in a suit and tie. Sorry. He's dressed as a judge, and he calls himself the caliph. Now, why does he do that? He's dressed as a judge because the law is already there, he would say. It's Islamic Sharia. It was developed basically at the time of the Prophet Muhammad in the 7th century. Added on a little bit during the first several successors to the Prophet, who were friends of the Prophet, who knew Muhammad personally, who had been in battles with the Prophet when he was consolidating the new Muslim community in Western Arabia. So he would say that is God's law. It came from Muhammad and his successors. Now government's job is to interpret that law. So when you read in the papers that he wants to impose a tax, for example, on Christians, don't be surprised. That's what they did in Arabia in the new Muslim community in the 7th century, 8th century, 9th century. Christians paid a tax. It's called the jizya. It really only stopped a couple hundred years ago towards the end of the Ottoman Empire when European countries leaned on the Turks and said, "Stop that." So, but prior to that, it was normally done, and it lasted for centuries. So, but at the same time, he's going after Christians that way, in a way that we obviously consider to be totally inappropriate. He's also saying to women, your job is to be at home raising the families. Your role is important in our community, but you don't need professional careers. That is not appropriate for you. Where does he get that? That, again, is the role of women at the time of the Prophet. Think about what he calls himself. He doesn't call himself president. He doesn't call himself prime minister. He doesn't call himself supreme leader. He calls himself the caliph. The caliph in Arabic, it just means successor. And whose successor is he? He is a successor to the Prophet Muhammad, like those companions of the Prophet were in the 7th century. It's all tied back to a vision of the Muslim community, frankly, when it was expanding and when it was taking over North Africa, Central Asia, Persia. It reached all the way to central Spain at its height. One other thing about the caliph, he has a view, he's a judge, he interprets Islamic law. If you are a Christian, you'll get to pay a tax. If you're a Jew, you pay the same tax. If, however, you are a Muslim, but you will not follow the laws that the caliph lays out, then you have a bigger problem. And of course, Shia Muslims do not recognize those first caliphs. They view them as illegitimate entirely because they were not from the family of Muhammad. They were companions, but not family. Abu Bakr Baghdadi has absolutely no patience for Shia. He considers them apostates. This is a Shia mosque that he detonated in Mosul about 6 weeks ago. And he has detonated Shia mosques in all of the places where they are found in the Islamic State because they do not follow his interpretation, which he believes is the correct interpretation that goes all the way back to the Prophet Muhammad. Abu Bakr Baghdadi is one extreme in the debate going on in the Middle East right now about religion and government and what is the proper role of religion and government in society. Anybody know who this is? Anybody? This is a guy named Rashid Ghanouchi. He too is an Islamic fundamentalist. First thing you might notice about him is he's in a coat and tie. Rashid Ghanouchi is an Islamic fundamentalist. He runs, manages, he directs, he guides the Islamic fundamentalist party called Renaissance, or in Arabic, Nahda, in the country of Tunisia in North Africa. He too wants religion to have a prominent role in society. However, he believes that ultimately people must use their logic and their intellect to do laws that are consistent with Islam but appropriate for modern conditions. He believes, therefore, you have to have elections. Abu Bakr Baghdadi, believe me, the Islamic State is not going to have any elections anytime soon. He believes you must have not only elections, but you have to have democracy. You even have to have freedom of speech. Remember, I was just talking about Abu Bakr Baghdadi tolerates no dissent from Shia or anybody else. This guy, let me give you an example of how tolerant of others he is. When the Tunisians overthrew the dictator in their country, Zainuddin Ben Ali, in February 2011, this guy's party ran in elections and they got the majority in the parliament. But he formed a coalition with two secular political parties. Two secular, non-Islamists don't want Islam in the government at all, unlike him. But he formed a political alliance with them. Abu Bakr Baghdadi and the Islamic State would never form an alliance, a political alliance with secularists, because if he did that, he would be accepting secular ways of thinking which are inconsistent with the Sharia that he is trying to promote. This guy is saying Sharia changes over time. Sharia changes over time. So if we have an alliance with secular political parties, it may be appropriate for our circumstances now. He still wants a conservative religious influence in society, but he's looking at doing it in a different way. Just to give you another example, the Prime Minister of Tunisia was from his party, under this guy's direction. He served in Tunisia from 2011 until the start of this year, 2014. But in early 2014, about 10 months ago, the student unions in Tunisia, the labor unions in Tunisia, the Bar Association in Tunisia, and the Chamber of Commerce all went to him and said, your prime minister is not working out. He's causing a lot of problems. We have too much violence. You're not tough enough on the other Islamic extremists of the country. We need your prime minister to go, and we need a new unity technocratic government. Now, how many of you think Abu Bakr Baghdadi, if presented with an ultimatum by people in his Islamic State, would step down if told? How many of you expect that he would do that? Good. This guy, Ghanouchi, told the prime minister to step down. No violence, no accusations of treason or no accusations of treachery. He just said, we have to do it. We have to have a unity government, and we'll go to new elections and we'll see how we do. And so right now, in Tunisia, there's an election campaign underway. She's from the Renaissance Party, the Nahda Party, Ghanouchi's party, and they're competing for votes in an election to determine the parliamentary majority, and that will name the prime minister. And they're running against secular parties in Tunisia. This is the biggest one. Notice these women, not one of them has their heads covered. That's the alternative vision of Tunisian society, a society of choice, a society of greater individual freedoms. So she's obviously a conservative Muslim, and yet I think if you were to ask her if these people should be required to cover their heads, she would say no. She would say it's better if they do, but only if they're convinced themselves that it's the right thing to do. Abu Bakr Baghdadi not only would not have women in an election campaign, he wouldn't have elections to begin with. One other thing about Ghannouchi, which I find very interesting on the subject of women, the Tunisian constitution, which he approved, along with those secular parties I mentioned, requires that the Tunisian parliament the next time have half of its members be women. I've never heard of that in any country in the world, much less an Arab country. And for an Islamic fundamentalist to agree to promote women's participation in politics and government that way, it's an Islamic fundamentalist of an entirely different breed. So my point to you in going through this in some detail is we throw around terms, especially in things like Fox News and CNN, Islamic fundamentalist or an Islamic extremist. Be very careful of that, because there's a wide spectrum of opinion, even within conservative Islamic circles, about what is the role of government and what is the role of religion in the society. Now, the Tunisian elections, they're going to be the 24th to the 26th. I'm hoping that they go well. There are international election monitors over there now, including some from the United States, from the National Democratic Institute. If they go well, I would assume that there will be another national unity government, and they will begin drafting legislation, and hopefully there'll be a lot of hard arguments. You can imagine hard arguments. But hopefully they will reach some consensus on key issues affecting Tunisia: economic policy, foreign policy, social policy. That is an optimistic scenario, and if Tunisia does well, I think other Arab countries will sit up and take note. It'll be a real downer for Abu Bakr Baghdadi, for example. And if you think, well, why would people pay attention to Tunisia? It's over there in North Africa. Remember, the Arab Spring in 2011 started in Tunisia. People in places like Egypt, Syria, Yemen, and Bahrain, Libya, were watching that and said, wow, if the Tunisians can overthrow their dictator, so can we. So Tunisia's success will be noticed if it is successful. The price of getting it wrong is also very high. Egypt, for example, also overthrew a dictator and also elected an Islamic fundamentalist, a guy from the Muslim Brotherhood, which I assume you know what the Muslim Brotherhood is. Unlike Ghannouchi, who worked with secular parties, the Egyptian president, a guy named Morsi, refused to work with them. Unlike Ghannouchi, who made concessions on the Tunisian constitution, like half of the women being parliamentarians, Morsi in Egypt refused any concessions. So he was not inclusive. He rammed Islamic legislation through, and he created huge resentments. Eventually, there were demonstrations on the streets in Egypt just about a year and a half ago, and a guy named Abdel Fattah Sisi, a general, the head of the Egyptian armed forces, in a coup d'etat, which we don't like to call it a coup d'etat, but it was a coup d'etat, against an elected president. They overthrew him. This picture is from demonstrations. These are people supporting the Islamic fundamentalist Muslim Brotherhood president in a place called Rabaiya Adia in central Cairo. Just this one demonstration, they estimate 600 to 700 people were shot by the police. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,000 to 4,000 Egyptians have been killed in post-coup d'etat violence. That's bad enough. This is Syria, where again, people tried to overthrow a regime. In that place, they didn't even get to elections. The army from the beginning fought against the uprising. This is the old market of Aleppo, in northwestern Syria, not very far from the Turkish border. That's how it used to look. This is a picture of it about 2 months ago. So the stakes in this debate about government and about the role of religion in government are extremely high for the people living on the ground. Now, there's a second conflict, and I'm assuming many of you already know sort of the broad outlines of the Sunni-Shia conflict. So I just want to make a few key points. The first is, this is not only an Arab issue. There is one country in the region which has a majority of Shia in its population. Well, there's 3 countries, but one powerful country, which is Iran. The Iranian Revolution in 1979 and the establishment of an Islamic state, again run by a judge, just like Abu Bakr Baghdadi in the Islamic State, same thing in Iran, but Shia, the supreme guide of Iran, a guy named Khamenei, is a jurisprudent. That's how he was chosen for the job. When that government was set up, the Shia in neighboring Iraq started demanding political rights, and they started having marches and demonstrations. The president of Iraq at that time, 1979, 1980, was a guy named Saddam Hussein. We took him out in 2003, and what happened is, as soon as we took him out, the Shia, this is a demonstration that they have in Karbala, this is the mosque of Hussein, the third imam for the Shia, and the one who was killed by Sunnis at the Battle of Karbala. This is the mosque in Karbala, where Hussein is buried. They then rose up, and because they are the majority, during the time of the American occupation and then the American presence, the Shia formed the core of the Iraq government and excluded the heretofore dominant Sunnis who had controlled most of the military and the senior government apparatus. This is ongoing. This isn't over. Just because we've pulled our troops out, Iran and its friends are still fighting the Sunnis and their friends. So Syria is a cockpit for this. That's Hezbollah's leader, Nasrallah Bashar, and that's the former Iranian president. This is a poster in downtown Baghdad. This, of course, is Hezbollah with the yellow flags. The key things to know about Hezbollah are Iran set it up to fight the Israelis in 1982, but it quickly grew into an entire militia, not just a terrorist group that took out 240 of our Marines in 1983. It actually assumed fighters by the thousands who have repeatedly fought Israel, most recently fought an all-out war against Israel in 2006, and then had the money and the resources to rebuild the damage in South Beirut. The Israelis pummeled South Beirut, took out infrastructure, took out housing. Hezbollah, with Iranian money, rebuilt everything. If you go to South Beirut now, the damage has all been completely repaired. These are members of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps that are fighting in Syria, that are fighting in Iraq. They now have people stationed in Iraq that are working with these guys. These are Shia militia, Iraqi Shia militia. We ended up having to fight them ourselves between 2004 and 2007. These particular marchers are from the Jaish al-Mahdi, belonging to this guy, a Shia imam named Muqtada as-Sadr. All of this to say that the Iranians are connected into Syria, connected into Lebanon, connected into Iraq. And in all of those places, Sunnis are competing with Shia for political power. So when you think about the Middle East, the way I think about it is the really driving conflict is this yellow line. Anybody know what that yellow line is? This yellow line is basically where Sunnis and Shia communities come together. It actually extends into Lebanon right across to the end. That's the fault line. If you've read Samuel Huntington's Conflict of Civilizations, that would be what Huntington would call the fault line. Notice that the countries that are in the news the most now, Iraq and Syria, are right on that fault line. And Lebanon, so far, has held together. I think that's actually a minor miracle. But the pressure on Lebanon between Sunnis and Shias is growing. So when you think about Abu Bakr Baghdadi, don't just think of him as some relic from the age of the Prophet Muhammad. He is that. But what he really is he is a reaction to this fault line. That's where he comes from. And he has a vision, fighting in this fault line against the Shia, of what the government, after the battle is won against the Shia, what the government and what the status of religion should look like. Okay, last thing. I was speaking in Chicago last night, and I was talking about this, and at the very end I said, I bet you're wondering how come I haven't talked about the Israelis and Palestinians, and a lot of the people in Chicago is like, yeah. So let me tell you, right now, October 14th, 99% of the attention of the people on the ground in the region, from Rabat to Oman, are not focused on Jerusalem. They're focused on that fault line that I was talking about. Tunisians by the thousands are going to fight in Syria and Iraq. Moroccans by the thousands are going. Yemenis, Saudis, Kuwaitis, Jordanians. That's the issue. This is a battle that has been going on now for decades. Attention is really not focused on it. John Kerry tried to get the peace process started and got nowhere. So I want to leave you all, as you think about moving into careers of national security, with this thought. This is a progression of what Palestinian Arabs controlled 1947 up till the Six-Day War in 1967 and today. The space for Palestinians to create their own state, the space for Palestinians to create their own state outside of Israel, independent, viable, what we call the two-state solution, Israel and Palestine, the space for that is disappearing amidst Israeli settlement policy. And what I can see happening is that there's going to be another place where there's going to be a debate about the role of religion and the role of government in promoting and defending religion in the Middle East to come. And it'll be in Israel, which now is a single state that also includes Palestinians who demand equal rights. And that will threaten the Jewish identity of Israel. So I can see the same issue, society, shape of society, and religion and government in society, and it's coming there. So on that very cheery note, let me finish and ask if there are any questions. Thank you.
I got a water for you.
Great.
So as you have questions, go ahead and introduce yourself first, okay?
Jim at third class Raves.
Hey.
Sir, you've given us like a good background of like what your opinions are, or not what your opinions are, but like a history of what's going on, or at least recent history. So what, in your opinion, should the United States do, given all this information?
The first and the most important thing is to understand we don't control it. I was in Iraq for 5 years. We had 170,000 troops there at one point. We absolutely did not control it. Just plain didn't. We may be able to influence it on the margins here and there, but we do not control any of these places. So we need to approach all of this with a certain level of modesty and humility. These societies are going to have to work out their problems themselves. That said, people like Abu Bakr Baghdadi have an ideology which says we have to win no matter what, because if we don't win, God's law is going to be violated and we will be held responsible. And so I think he will, at some point, lash out against us, and he does represent a clear and present threat. Earlier today, I was looking at videos of French-speaking jihadis who had gone from France to go fight for Abu Bakr Baghdadi's Islamic State, and they were very clear. We're coming after the French because of their help for the coalition. I am sure they will come after the United States too. So I certainly support what the president is doing in terms of taking action against the Islamic State. I think one of the ways we can help places like this, we don't control them, but we do need to weigh in when there's armed conflict. We need to weigh in on behalf of moderates in these countries that are struggling militarily against extremists, whether that be in Syria, or whether that be in Iraq, or in Yemen, or wherever it is. Extremists always have a very appealing message. The answers always look so easy. Then when they come to power, there almost always are problems, and a lot of those problems are projected out against the West. People like Abu Bakr Baghdadi blame you, blame me, for a lot of the problems they have now. They're very anti-Western.
Mm-hmm. Where do they identify in the Sunni-Shia conflict?
Yeah, there are both Sunni and Shia Kurds. There are a lot of Shia Kurds from a community called the Faili community that live, for example, in the Iraqi capital, Baghdad. And they probably identify a little more with the Shia. But above all, the Sunni Kurds, Barzani and the Kurdish regional government in northern Iraq, which is connected then to the Syrian Kurdish community in northeastern Syria and the Turkish Kurdish community in southeastern Turkey. I think all of them, I think if you ask their publics, they'd want an independent country. And I believe the Iraqi Kurdish regional government is going to hold a referendum on independence before the end of the year. I'm sure it'll pass by wide margins. Frankly, I think there's a genuine desire for independence, but I also think Barzani, the head of the Iraqi Kurdish region, is going to use that referendum as leverage in his political negotiations with the central government in Baghdad. I think he knows fully well that without Iranian backing, American backing, Turkish backing, there's no way he can declare independence. And our policy so far has been territorial integrity of Iraq, a unified state. Certainly that is the Iranian policy. They do not want Iraq to break apart. They want their allies, the Iraqi Shia, to run the place. They don't want it to break apart. And I think even the Turks, especially with the rioting that's gone on the last few days in the southeastern parts of Turkey, Kurds revolting because of the battle in Kobani, protesting, not revolting. I think even there's going to be reluctance. So I think the Kurds are in a wishful state of independence, but I think their political leadership is plenty smart to realize how risky that is.
I saw one hand over here, and then we'll shift right.
So, First Class Blanchard, you've been praised for having traveled around Syria, encouraging peaceful protests against the Assad regime. Looking back on what's transpired in the last several years, would you have acted differently as it happened?
Yeah. I actually was not encouraging protests. That's not what an ambassador should do. No, really, seriously. The Kennedy people at the Profile and Courage wrote that up, and I frankly wish they had gotten it right. What we were doing was saying publicly and in private to both protesters and the government, they have a right to protest peacefully. Whether or not they do, that's their business. But they have a right to do it. It's in the United Nations Charter of Universal Human Rights from 1947, a charter which, by the way, Syria signed. And it is specifically cited among the basic human rights, universally to be applied, the right to assemble and protest peacefully. So when I said that to the Syrian authorities, the foreign minister and the president's advisors, they said, oh, well, they're violent. And I said, no, I've been to Hama. I've been to Jassim. I've seen it myself. They are not violent. They've not burned a police station. They haven't burned a Ba'ath Party headquarters. They haven't burned anything. You're the ones that are violent. And the foreign minister sort of stolidly sat there. He's a rather round man anyway, kind of looks like Jabba the Hutt. And just said, well, you weren't in the right places. I said, well, we drove all over the city. You know, it's a city of 1 million people, but we drove all over. So I wouldn't have done any of that differently. And I'll tell you why. In the end, we have to defend our own national security, but I think there's a lot also to be said for standing up for human rights around the world. It doesn't mean we have to go to war over human rights, but it does mean we have to speak out. And a lot of my ambassador colleagues in Damascus, I won't name any countries, the French ambassador was very vocal with me on human rights, but a lot of other countries' ambassadors were afraid to speak out because they didn't want to cause problems in the relationship with a guy who's a total dictator, ruthless, bloody, uses chemical weapons on his own people. I personally think if we cause friction with people like that, so much the better. It would be much better for people in the Middle East to say, well, the Americans at least stand up for human rights, than for us to coddle up to a dictator as ruthless as Bashar al-Assad, who will flick us off the first time he finds it convenient anyway. So no, I have no regrets about that. Sorry, the light.
So, how do you see the situation with the Islamic State and ISIL affecting the West's relationship with Iran?
Yeah. We have a common enemy. But I don't think we're going to be able to work with them. And I don't think we'll be able to work with them for 2 reasons. Number one, we have such a troubled relationship with Iran in general, whether it be the nuclear dossier, their support for Hamas, their support for Hezbollah. They're holding some Americans, we think, hostage, like that FBI guy and other Americans. There's a journalist from the Washington Post now that they're holding. We have just a lot of scratchiness in the relationship. So it's really hard for me to imagine your counterparts 5, 7 years ahead of you sitting down in a sort of a tactical operations room with the commander of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, Quds Force, General Soleimani, and working out strategies on, we'll go here if you go there. The Iraqis may be doing a little of that shuttling back and forth now on the ground. I think they are. Certainly they want to. I think we tolerate it. I don't think it's something we're seeking out. There's a second reason which I think will make it impossible for us to really work with the Iranians. Where did this Islamic State problem come from in the first place? I mean, what caused it? It's that fault line I was talking about, where the Sunni and the Shia communities come together. The Iranians in Syria, the Iranians in Iraq have been encouraging the worst sectarian violence inflicted on Sunni communities, which, not surprisingly, have answered with horrific violence. But it starts in Syria, and frankly, it starts in Iraq, with Shia-inspired violence against Sunni communities. When the United States left Iraq, when U.S. military forces pulled out of Iraq in 2011, the al-Qaeda problem in Iraq was not solved, but it was substantially contained. It was not a particularly serious threat to Baghdad or anywhere else. And it still had a few, they estimated maybe 100 to 200 followers. Now they've got 40,000. What happened? Nouri al-Maliki, the prime minister, Shia, with heavy-duty Iranian backing, and frankly, we didn't stand up for human rights in Iraq, which is now costing us. But the Iranians were encouraging Maliki and those Shia militia that I had in the picture. There was a lot of sectarian killing. Families were losing their property. Militias were seizing their lands, seizing their farms. People were being thrown in jail. People were being tortured. People were disappearing, all on a sectarian basis. So, of course, in Iraq, the Sunnis, when the Islamic State came in, and started kicking out the Iraqi army that had been doing these things, people were like, oh, well, maybe they'll be better than the other guys. That's why Mosul welcomed the Islamic State when it came in. That's a real problem. And in Syria, again, the regime, Bashar al-Assad's regime, responded with unbelievable brutality with using Iranian money, Iranian weapons, and in many cases, Iranian soldiers. The Iranians even organized Iraqi and Afghan Shia to go train in Iran and then fly to Syria over Iraq and fight for Bashar al-Assad. The Free Syrian Army just captured a couple of Afghan Shia the other day, and it's on YouTube. You can see it on the video. The guy's talking in, I don't know, Dari or something. So I mean, the Iranians and we just have a very different, the Iranians look at Baghdadi and say, this guy is a mess, he's terrible. And we're like, yeah, we agree, but this is not something you can fix with just more Shia militarism. I mean, you've got to deal with the underlying political problem. That the Iranians do not want to do. That's a long answer to your short question.
So everyone must know that Ambassador Ford started his morning at 3:30, went for a run at 5. So let's thank him for his time so he can go home and get some sleep.
Oh, thank you.
Which I don't know, makes you all sound a little lazy. Maybe not. We'd like to present you with our...
I don't know if any of you are running in the Baltimore Marathon, but I'm sure if you do, you will beat me handily on Saturday. So.
I don't think so. I think you would probably win that race. So we want to present you with a photo album for your visit.
Thank you very much. This is wonderful. Really, it was a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Excellent.
Thanks, Mark.